name is Kristy Robinett, and we are going to be discussing creepy creatures of Michigan. What does Washington State, California, and Pennsylvania have in common with Michigan? It is that we have the most sightings of Bigfoot, or also known as Sasquatch. Since 1976, the FBI has actually been interviewing people who have had Sasquatch or Bigfoot sightings in the Michigan area because there is so much. We have so many dense woods and so many secret passageways that Sasquatch can hide. And so there's so many different theories with who he is, and where he came from. They think that possibly it is a multi-dimensional cryptoid that hides in caves between different dimensions. Is it a ghost? Is it a demon? You'll know that it's Bigfoot because you'll smell it first. It is the smelliest of all of the creatures. Could he be a multi-dimensional portal jumper? Quite possibly. Nobody who has followed this creature has been able to actually chase after it, even though it is supposedly a very slow-moving creature. It just disappears. And so next time you are up north, you might smell the creature, and it's not your camper next to you who hasn't showered. It is probably Bigfoot. Our next creature is the Michigan werewolf. It's a beautiful story, actually, and it's much like Beauty and the Beast from Disney. There was a beautiful girl, her name was Genevieve, and she fell in love with a young man who was willing to marry her, but her father really wanted her to be a nun, and so he had signed her up to go to the convent that fall. He was devastated. That was who his sweetheart was. That was who he really wanted to be his wife and to have children with. But she had already told her father that she would be a nun. And so he ended up making a deal with the devil. And he went into the woods near Grosse Pointe, and he asked this Native American tribe, who they say had practiced black magic, what he could do in order to keep the love of his life. And they said that in exchange for your soul, you will then be a werewolf and you'll be able to capture her heart. Not sure how that's going to capture anybody's heart, but apparently he made the deal because he thought that would keep her. Well, Genevieve had an altar in the woods nearby where she had a Virgin Mary set up, and she went there to pray, and she was praying to the Virgin Mary asking, what should I do? I'm supposed to give my heart, my soul, my life to you, but I'm in love with this man. And it was then that the werewolf, her boyfriend, came and fought with her. He didn't realize that the full moon would turn him into a horrible creature. She fought him off and ran, and he turned to stone in front of the altar. She was saved, but he lost the love of his life. It is still said that on the full moon, if you are in the Grosse Pointe area, that you will hear the howl of the werewolf on the full moon. So Michigan Dogman, very much like the werewolf. Some say the story of the Dogman began with a 1987 radio prank by a northern Michigan radio personality called Steve Cook. But following the broadcast, as he talked about this Dogman, this man that turned into a dog or turned into a canine type of a creature that howled and had amber-like or sometimes blue eyes, he started to get phone calls from people who said that it wasn't at all just a fable, that Michigan actually did have a Dogman, and that many had encountered this Dogman in different areas of the Michigan area. He was surprised when there actually was a sighting, or they believe it was actually an attack, in Luther, Michigan. It was near the Huron-Manistee National forest. There's a population of only 300 people there still today, but they say many of those people who visit in that campground or who live around there have come into contact with this dogman. The dogman stands tall, it has canine-like, and a startling howl. The sightings date back originally to 1887, and the stories have continued on. The beast has been in the minds of Michiganders for that 130 years. So the lumberjacks, because they lumbered a lot in that location, saw the creature and described it as having a man's body and a dog's head. And according to the legend, the dogman appears to humans in a 10-year cycle that falls on years ending in the number 7. Why, we don't know. But the men in the woods who encountered the beast at the time in the Manistee Forest, near the Manistee Forest, have said that it has made them believers of the dogman. The Shadow Man, also known as the Top Hat Man, is actually a story that's very close to my own heart. Since I was a child, and I grew up in a home in the Detroit, Michigan area that was very haunted. It was haunted when we moved into it. My parents got a great deal for it, and they should have known there was a reason for that. But my siblings and I were haunted by this man that wore either a fedora or a top hat and looked a lot like Jack the Ripper from the perception of what they put him out to be. The Top Hat Man has stories that span the globe. He is known as an entity that's possibly a demon or an interdimensional monster. What he does is he comes out of the closets of small children and he creates fear. And that energy he takes as fuel to help him continue to grow and manifest into other people's or other children's lives. Most shadow entities are usually seen for a moment or two before disappearing, but the one thing that he has that is common throughout everybody's story of him is that he creates the sleep paralysis, or he chokes the child so that they believe that they're having a nightmare, but they're completely wide awake. The parents believe it's night terrors, they believe it's fears, but it is the Top Hat Man. He feeds off their fear. He's typically seen as a shadow figure, and you can make out the hat, and typically it's like a black or a darkened cape, and sometimes he's got glowing red eyes. He's typically black and featureless, though, and some people believe that he's a fallen angel, or he's the angel of death, or he's a demonic entity of some sort. Since I was little, and since I've been an adult, I haven't had those interactions, but when I was little, I had the interactions of this very creepy man who would come and he would play with our electronics, and he would create this fear, and as soon as our parents would walk into the room, everything would go back to normal, except the electronics would still act abnormal. And so what does he want? They believe, again, that he tries to steal the souls of children. He tries to take the fear of them and manifest into doing more negative energy, because what he does do is he causes disruption of sleep, and he causes disruption within the family with arguments and depression and fear. And so how do you tackle this creature that we don't even really believe exists, and yet we can see him, or there's experiences that we've had with him? Well, we use blessings or prayer or positive energy that we put out. Some people have moved their homes because they've been felt threatened by this creature, but he just follows. The Skinwalker is another creepy creature of Michigan. The woods come alive, especially in the summertime with travelers to northern Michigan. And the Skinwalker is another creature that is often encountered. He's got lots of different accounts, especially in the Sault Ste. Marie area. And the Skinwalker is a shape-shifting witch. So there's lots of different legends of how he came to be or who he is, but they are shape-shifting witches that are part of the Native American culture. Different tribes have their own tales to tell. The witches have the ability to transform as animals, as well as possess other people, and to bring folks back from the dead with the dust of their body. They wear the skin and sometimes skulls or antlers of their chosen creatures, and they create them as familiars for them. The most famous case of the Skinwalker is the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, which has resulted in so many sightings on the 500-acre ranch. But Michigan also has many sightings, and that is one creature that I would not want to run into. BlackEyed Children. No, it's not if you get into a fight with them or they're fighting. BlackEyed Children are actually mysterious creatures who supposedly resemble kids between the age of 6 and 16. They have pale skin, their eyes are completely blacked out, and these creatures show up at the doors of unsuspecting residents, and they ask in a breathless and monotone voice if they can come in, use the bathroom, make a phone call, get some help, get a ride home. The theories about BlackEyed Children are that they are vampires, and there's a variety of claims about them that have left a lot of scary thoughts. And I had my own sighting of a black-eyed child, and I never believed in them, never thought I'd have to believe in them, but I had my own sighting in Mackinac several years ago. And I wanted to read to you an account that I had that is in one of my books. So it was a chilly autumn afternoon in October at one of the most beautiful places in Michigan, Mackinac Island. I was there for a business, but even on business, I try to find my time to explore, and that is what I was doing along with several of my friends. My husband and my son was in tow. The streets were crowded as we dined at the Pink Pony for an early dinner and then went to grab some fudge and taffy for later. I would see someone here and there on the streets and shout out a greeting. As I exited one of the many souvenir shops, I heard my name being called from across the street and was surprised to see that it was someone I had worked with over a decade ago. What a small world it really was, I thought. We chatted a bit, said our goodbyes, and headed to meet up with my group who had since abandoned me. I glanced across the street to see if I could catch the sight of anybody, somebody, but the streets that had been so busy had turned empty. There was not a soul left on the street. As I continued to search for somebody, a storm came by. The sky darkened, it started to rain, and I went to go enter a store because I didn't know what was going on, and then I heard my name called. It said, "Kristy, ma'am, how are you doing?" Thinking the person must have been mistaken me for somebody else, still wondering where everybody had gone, I turned around and there was a young boy, about the ages of 8 years old. He was wearing a long brown wool coat with a matching flat cap. I had a hard time answering him as he continued to say my name over and over. I was hypnotized by his eyes that were colored entirely black. I shivered and I took a step back from him. "How are you today, Kristy?" He again said my name. I whispered that I was fine, and the boy looked hard at me for a second with a wide smile on his face. "How are you enjoying Mission Point?" Which was actually the place that I was staying. The boy snarled and emphasized my name. "How are you enjoying Mission Point, Kristy?" he repeated. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move. And just at once the storm passed, the streets that were so empty except for the boy and myself filled with people again, and I heard my husband call my name. It was then that I felt unglued from my spot and the boy ran into the crowd. I was completely baffled by this. I didn't know how he knew my name. He was 8 years old. He talked like an adult. He was dressed like something out of the 1800s. Thought maybe he was part of a reenactment of some sort, but there wasn't any on the island during that time. So I thought it might have been an innocent encounter, but I couldn't get out of my mind what he looked like and that he knew my name and that I couldn't move and that I was stuck. So I ended up going to a friend of mine who was an expert in the paranormal, if you will, and I shared with him my encounter. It was a black-eyed child, my friend told me. I scoffed. They are fables, they're lores, right? Black-eyed people, sometimes called black-eyed children or Becks, they are classified as young people, often children, like I said, that have the solid black with no differential between the pupil or the iris. Some have been noted that their skin is tinted blue, as if they're a corpse. They sometimes appear in pairs, and their mannerism is confident and eloquent, with speech patterns of an adult. Well, it sounded exactly like what I had encountered. But who were they? What was he? And what did he want? My friend told me that he thought that they were aliens, possibly non-entities, possibly demonic. Honestly, nobody knew. Nobody knows. They try and get into your head, your mind, your soul, your heart. They conjure images of the vampire lore. You have to invite them into your house, into your job, into your car. But don't do it. Because what they are doing is they are sucking the soul. They are sucking the happiness from your life. So whatever they are soul suckers. Creepy. Creepy. But this kid that I ran into simply was checking on me. I told my friend, no harm, no foul. And yet you're shivering when you're telling me this. He reminded me. And I checked, and sure enough, I was. Why was he checking on me? I asked. My friend didn't have an answer, and I still don't have an answer today. But I will tell you, a couple months after that experience, not only did I have nightmares of this child, but I had horrible things that had gone wrong. Everything from my car breaking down in unexplained ways, to illnesses, to sicknesses, to business deals that had gone bad. Now, was it this soul-sucking vampire? I don't know. Sometimes these types of things can get into your head and create negative intentions. And I think that that's exactly what that had done. But if you're ever on Mackinac Island, be careful of the little boy that's wearing the wool coat when it's 90 degrees outside and talks to you like an adult. Mackinac Island has its share of legends and lore and unknowns between aliens and Native American spirits and the battles that had happened there, so why not add a black-eyed child to it? Nain Rouge. So Michigan, especially the Detroit area, was and is founded by the French. And so the legend of Nain Rouge is said to go back to 1701 when Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac founded Detroit. In 1704, a dog owned by Cadillac bit a Native American. And he was so angry that he put a curse on Cadillac and he put a curse on Detroit. He said he was going to be sending a red demon to him, and he would pay for taking his land away from him, hurting him. There's a lot of different theories on how the Nain Rouge actually came about. Most people do blame Cadillac for it, though. The name appeared right before the 1763 Battle of Bloody Run, where around 60 British soldiers were killed in a thwarted attack against Chief Pontiac. The folktale has persisted on the peripheral of Detroit culture, where the name appears before disasters strike. And so there's theories that this little red devil causes this conflict, and it has been a curse upon the streets of Detroit. But there's the other side of that too, that believes that this is not a demon at all, but it's the energy of this tribe that is actually trying to protect Detroit and trying to protect the streets of Detroit. And by doing so, it appears to help us know and be forewarned and let us be prepared for the hazards that are coming. Some say this dwarf could be seen before the 12th Street riot in 1967, and as recently in 1976, when it was reported that 2 DTE workers spotted what they thought was a child climbing a utility pole, only to be brutally crippled by a snowstorm. There's been other sightings, especially as our city sees changes, and I like to err on the side of positive as well, that this isn't a demon at all, but it is an energy that is telling us that change needs to come in order for us to have positive action. So beware this little red creature that you may encounter in the streets of Detroit. The lake monsters. So of course, Michigan is known for its Great Lakes, and every lake has its own legend. Every lake has its own creature. The snake creature of Lake Erie is one of the most known. It is our own Nessie that is here in Michigan. She's a giant serpent-like monster seen in all different colors. Everybody sees her differently, and she sometimes shows her fins. It's reported that in 1793 that she was seen continuously and that they knew that she was there and that they were very cautious with the boats that they sailed then. The Great Lynx water monster on Lake Huron, she is blamed for causing most of the shipwrecks. The hideous giant serpent of Lake Ontario. This is a giant serpent that has been seen in Lake Ontario since the 1820s, and numerous children have been frightened by this if they've spotted it on the shores of the lake. They say it breathes fire and that it can fly. And then the dragon of Lake Superior, they believe it's actually a dragon. It's not a creature like fish or Nessie at all. Some have seen it as a lion's head. Some have seen it as a turtle. Whatever this creature is, they believe it has supernatural powers. It causes storms. It shapeshifts. Its power lies in copper. It sacrifices itself to help sailors. So see, not every legend is hurtful. And then Lake Michigan. There are numerous reports of monsters in Lake Michigan. Some fishermen claim that they've accidentally captured video footage that has shown a huge serpent. Or is it a large eel? Whatever lurks behind or below or above our waters, we may never know. Paulding Lights. Have you guys ever seen the Paulding Lights? Has anyone ever taken the adventure to the Paulding Lights? So on a narrow road in a tiny town of Michigan near the Wisconsin border is a Michigan mystery that many have explored. A half a mile from the freeway or the woods, let me start that over, sorry. A half a mile from the freeway where the woods grow dense, there's a darker image. Let me start that wholly completely. Start Paulding Lights. Yeah. So, Paulding Lights. Have you ever experienced the Paulding Lights? On a narrow road in a tiny town of Michigan, near the Wisconsin border, in a very densely populated town, there is a Michigan mystery. A half a mile from the freeway, the woods grow dense, but there is one bright white light that can be seen from inside the woods that changes size and shapes before fading into the darkness. Some people believe that it is the headlights off the freeway, but it stays too long for it to be a car. Some people believe that it's a UFO or an alien encounter, while others believe it's fairies. And yet others believe that it possibly could be supernatural. The official legend says that the light comes from a swaying lantern by the ghost of a railroad brakeman who died when he was crushed as he tried to stop an oncoming train from hitting rail cars. The logging country, more than a century ago, and this was a logging country long ago, and local residents say that there was a number of railroads that ran through the forest that are now buried in the underneath. So we have our own ghostly lore in this area called Luke the Spook. Back in the 1800s, Dr. Lucas was called out one night for some medical assistance. And as he traveled back down Romeo Plank Road, he was returning from his house call, and his horse and buggy went off the bridge, and unfortunately, he died. From then on, hauntings have frequently occurred. On dark nights, a strange light resembling an old-fashioned lantern swaying in the night can be seen as a guide for travelers. Other witnesses claim they've seen an old horse and buggy moving through the trees. Now, the bridge doesn't look anything like it did back then. We're much more populated, but they say that Luke still helps passerbys along that area. Michigan has a very deep history of the legend of witches in the woods. And there's the Ada Witch, there's the Belleville Witch, there's the Salem Township Witch. And why would we have witches in the woods? During the Salem witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, a lot of the families had escaped to the United States in the Midwest because they wanted to get away from being condemned as witches. Some weren't necessarily supernatural witches, but their religious standings were different than others. So they were afraid of being seen as different and being seen as a witch. So they ran away. But others also still practiced a supernatural type of belief system. That one lady was named Elizabeth Soup. And she actually moved to the Michigan area from the New York area. And her husband loved politics. This was the late 1800s. And her husband became the mayor, if you will, of the town near Belleville. So Elizabeth Soup practiced witchcraft. Her husband did not. They were actually a family that was very loved within the community. She's buried in the oldest part of the cemetery in the Belleville area off of Denton Road. And she's buried next to her husband. People say she's definitely not at rest, though. Many who visit her grave have said that they have followed shadowy figures throughout the cemetery. They've heard voices, they've heard footsteps, and others have reported orbs that were sighted in the woods nearby. She is sort of a fascinating creature with that lore. People take different tokens to her grave. There's actually two different cemetery plots for her, so we're not really sure which one she's buried in. Both date back a long time. I've had a lot of calls saying that they've had these experiences with Elizabeth, or what they assume is Elizabeth. But I had my own experience. Long ago, I was investigating the cemetery with my team. And we actually went into the daytime, because you can investigate in the daytime. It doesn't have to be at night. And we went into the cemetery with all of our investigation tools, our cameras, and our gadgets, if you will. And we set everything near the cemetery plot that we thought she was at. And just as the bright sunny day that had been, it turned to a stormy, cloudy sky. And most of the team ran for the car to take cover from the rain. And I sat there next to her grave with the gadgets and covering them because the electronics in the rain doesn't do so well. And a lady walking a baby with a baby carriage in the middle of the storm came right by me. And she said, I wouldn't be there if I were you. And I'm like, okay, why? And she goes, Elizabeth will haunt you. I thought, this is peculiar. And she disappeared out of sight. And just then, the entire team heard what sounded like a dozen wild pigs in the back of the cemetery, snorting and growling and howling. And just like that, it went away. The storm, the pig noises, and the lady that was pushing her baby in the carriage disappeared into the thin air. And so we believe that Elizabeth isn't necessarily haunting in a negative way, but she's protecting that cemetery. She's protecting that community. UFOs and aliens. Do you believe? More than 50% of the population believes that there's life outside of this earthly plane, and many believe that aliens actually walk beside us and with us. One of the reasons they believe that Michigan has such an intense sightings of UFOs is we have supernatural lines. They are the ley lines that crisscross across the globe like latitudinal and longitude. How do I pronounce that, you guys? Latitude and longitude? Longitude? Yeah. I maybe might not even say that.
Okay.
Again, English major. Okay, let's start UFOs over. UFOs and aliens. More than 50% of the population believes that there is life outside of the earth in alien-like creatures. Many believe that they walk beside us and they walk with us and we don't even know it. Why is Michigan such a hot spot for UFO activity? They believe that it's ley lines, or what they call supernatural lines. And they are lines that crisscross across the globe. They're dotted with monuments and natural landforms, and they're carried along rivers, and they increase the supernatural energy. Along these lines, at the places they interact, there's pockets of concentrated energy that can be harnessed by certain individuals, specifically those that are not of this earth. I am not an alien or a UFO investigator. I'm actually a little bit frightened by UFOs, maybe a little bit more than I would say Bigfoot. But several years ago, I was called by a friend of mine that was a specialist in alien encounters, and there was an investigation that he wanted me to attend that was in the northern Michigan area by Petoskey. The homeowner was having alien encounters where the spaceship, he said, would come right over the mountain, the dunes in front of his house, and almost every night would land, and the creatures would come into the house and would haunt him. So I was skeptical, of course, and I told my friend, I don't do UFOs, I don't do aliens, I am not the expert. And he said, no, but you are, and somebody who has investigated spirits. And maybe it's not a UFO. Maybe it's a spiritual encounter. So I want you to come so that we can sort of look at it from all different ranges. So I reluctantly agreed. We met up with the household, and I did a walkthrough, and there was definitely some strange energy. I don't know if I would have called it supernatural or if I would have called it UFO or alien energy, but it definitely was an unusual energy. And so that night, as we set up our cameras and we got ready to have our investigation and the family went to bed, we could hear footsteps all around and nobody was walking, everybody had gone. We could hear people talking that was of a different language. And we could see lights outside of the house that were not normal. So I did what every good investigator would do. I ran. And we all did, because it was something so abnormal that we all took off. And the homeowner ended up moving. The home was torn down. The neighbors around there actually says that they still have many different unidentified supernatural happenings around there. So is Petoskey haunted by aliens? Quite possibly. Ghosts are a little bit more my thing. Like I said, I had had encounters with spirits and ghosts all my life. I see spirits. They actually don't scare me unless it's the top hat man. And while Michigan has a lot of different haunted locations, like Fort Wayne, Detroit, the Whitney, Masonic Temple downtown is incredibly haunted. If you're traveling, the Marshall Inn in Marshall, Michigan, or Mission Point on Mackinac. Honestly, anything on Mackinac has spiritual, ghostly encounters. But my favorite ghost story was given to me several years ago when I was at a book signing. And a little girl came up to me. She was about 5 years old. And she saw my book, and it had the name Ghosts on it, and she read Ghosts on it. And she looked at me with her innocent eyes, and she goes, "Are ghosts real?" And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? Because of course they're real, but she's 5, and I didn't want to go against what her mom was telling me, or what was telling her. And so I looked at her mom, and her mom nodded for me to say whatever I wanted to say. So I said, yes, ghosts are real. And she said, I knew it, Mom, and she stomped her foot, and she said, can I tell you my story? And I said, absolutely. Out of mouths of babes, right? So she sat down, she pulled up a chair, and she sat down next to me, and she said, every night, this man with this hat and this long black wool coat, and it's plaid, comes out of my closet and says, hello. And she goes, every night he does that. So I thought he must be hungry. So I get him a banana, I've gotten him a donut, I've given him a cookie. I have laid all this food out into my closet, and he's never taken it. So is he a ghost? And the mom looks at me and says, that's what you've been doing with all of the food? And she goes, I'm trying to feed this man in my closet. And she obviously was so unafraid of the spirit. And she says, he tells me his name is Leonard. The mom turned ghost white herself and said, describe him again. And she did. Leonard was her mother's grandfather that had passed when she was 5 years old. And so the ghost was not something that was frightening at all, like the top hat man. It was just an ancestor protecting and saying hello. Most of our spirit encounters are mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, and they're not something that's really trying to creepily haunt you at all. So I'd like to think that it was a heaven hello for the mom that the daughter was able to give. Legends change and they evolve, much like the fish stories, but they go on from generation to generation. And as we delve into all of the legends around the campfires or around story times or around Christmas, whenever we're around our family and friends, the biggest thing is to listen. Put the electronics aside and talk to one another, because it's then that you'll find some creepy creatures and maybe some really exciting legends and lore as well.